Hello, this is James Merrigan from Small Night Projects, and the reason I'm doing this is because in this way, rather than a live broadcast through Substack, is because yesterday I was doing a live broadcast, 28 minutes long, and afterward I was trying to edit it in a way that I felt would be more streamlined, and I deleted the video. So that was 28 minutes of free associative content. But it's really not, this whole process is not about building content. It's really about thinking through things. And I find that speaking to a camera or imagining an audience is the best way of working through ideas, especially if you're not in proximity with other artists or other like-minded people who want to talk about this stuff. So I'm using this medium to think through things, really, and to find points of contact that I can make into a practical process that will go out into the world, and that won't be just thinking, but will become something in the world. So I'm going to tackle this two ways today. We'll call these the Small Night Project, or the Small Night Broadcasts, maybe. So to be more formal, but not too formal. Because what I've found through the Substack live feed is that you're kind of just thinking on your feet. And that's what I'm going to do here now. But I'm not sure how the medium, I'm using a GoPro, I'm using a mic. Don't know how that's going to change how I articulate and how I think through things. But the medium, I've found, especially through writing, always changes how you think, write, and feel, and how comfortable you are in sharing thoughts. The medium dictates everything. It dictates the message always. So, two things I'm going to talk about today, and that is, and they both relate to each other in a tangential way. So the first thing is a video interview with Liam Gillick and Nicholas Schaffhausen, who's a curator. Liam Gillick, of course, is a British artist who represented Germany in the Venice Biennale around 2009, 2010, not sure. And I experienced that show, and I've always been a very interested, or I've always been very interested in Liam Gillick, both as an artist and a thinker, but probably more specifically as a thinker. How he frames, how he conceptualizes his work. And in this discussion, which only happened last year somewhere in Europe, I'm going to speculate that it was Austria. But it's interesting because the setup by Nicholas Schaffhausen, who curated Liam Gillick's show in the German pavilion, is quite vague. He talks about decision making. And Liam Gillick always takes something vague and makes it very concrete. And he speaks about how he started as an artist and how he was very interested in criticality and writing. He talks about how his father, I think his father is Irish, and that language is very important to him, and that you shouldn't be ashamed of language or discourse, as Gillick calls it, and that's very much, that's always continued to be part of his work, language and criticality and theory. And he talks about how he started off, and when he graduated from our college, he went out in search of another artist, Lawrence Weiner, And Wiener, who died only a few years ago, um, he met him in a bar or something, and he didn't treat him as a teacher or a younger artist. Um, he just he saw him as an equal, and he discussed his work critically in that kind of equal space. There was no talking down or talking up. So, of course, Gillick comes with a repertoire, a critical and theoretical repertoire that could kind of balance with Lawrence Wiener's ability to talk. So there was something interesting in what Gillick is talking about here. He said that his work, or the way he saw it, was that his work came from a point of disappointment or dissatisfaction. He was working in his early 20s with Art Monthly. He was taking care of all the subscriptions. So he got a really good overview of the art scene, which was a very small place down. It's as he said, pre-blogging, pre-internet, pre-blogging, all of that stuff that created a very different space for discourse to travel and to connect. So it's all on the ground. It's all by word of mouth. But he talks about how he had to dissipate. He uses this word, dissipate. And what he means by that is that he started to write, to make art, to read music magazines, literary magazines. Even though he's working with Art Monthly, he said we never read the art magazines, which is fascinating. And he started to look at those other models of self-organization, which definitely happens in the music scene. And he started to transpose that onto the art scene. Now I'm putting these words into his mouth, but this is kind of what he means. And he started to create new models of production, art production, that involves all the systems, all the players, artists, curators. So the curator class is rising then at that point in the 90s. And you get relational aesthetics, which Gillick is connected with, Philippe Perenio. All these artists are coming together. They're making publications. They're having dinner and galleries. They're having events that dissipate, that break down. And I think that was really exhilarating for me to hear, because I think we've moved away from that a little bit. That we've moved into this centralizing, commodifying space of the internet, especially Instagram. And that has created a kind of passivity in respect to how we come together. So what he also says is that he wanted to retain, I've written down some notes, very short notes, retain this critical potential. And he wanted to find ways of keeping that intact. And that discourse could free flowly, and then within that discourse, art could be made. So this comes to my second point, and it's working towards an event that I'm working with Damien Flood, the painter who is represented by Green and Red. And he's having a solo exhibition in Green and Red in 2026 in October, concurrently with Dublin Gallery Weekend. And at Green and Red, Jerome O'Driscoll, the director, has set up a space called the Concrete Gallery downstairs, a basement space. And Damien has invited me in as part of Small Night Projects to create an event that coincides but also works ancillary to Damien's show. So over the last 20 years, myself and Damien, we met in art school in Dún Laoghaire as painters. He was a year ahead of me in Dún Laoghaire. And we struck up a conversation straight away. And we talked about art and the art world for hours on end. Like, it's one of those meetings of minds and criticality. We shared openly our criticism. We even had debates together, and there was a free-flowing discourse. It really, I definitely think that meeting made me into the critic I am today. That I had found someone that I could speak openly with. We had ridiculous debates in my house down in Wicklow when we were painting together after Dún Laoghaire about whether we should use turpentine or white spirits. I think that's the debate. But anyway, we've always had an open discourse. And at Green and Red, Damien, ever since his first exhibition there, has facilitated writing alongside his work. In a way, he was a precursor to the art writing movement that happened around the financial crash, where a lot of writing that was being produced wasn't criticism per se, but it was writing that worked alongside the exhibition. That it kind of took a pathway away from the artwork and then a return, but it wasn't really confronting the artwork in the way criticism does. And it's more literary. But he invited lots of different writers into this space, this publishing space. And I was one of the first writers as part of that first publication. I think it was called Spectral Gallery. Saskia Vermeulen was another writer, and Mary Conlon, who Damien had struck up a relationship with in terms of curation, as she was an emerging curator at that time. I also worked with Mary as well in those early days as an artist. So there was this discourse. Here's three different writers. There's a kind of curator, there's a filmmaker, an artist writing, Saskia, and then there's myself, who's a critic. And of course I wrote in a confrontational way, in terms of I've always kind of ran towards the artwork rather than running alongside it or away from it. And so that started this kind of publishing phase. And over the years, Damien, almost all his solo exhibitions, he's produced a pamphlet or a hardback publication or whatever. And writing has been very much language. Thinking through painting has always been part of his process. He sees it as important. And only the other day we were having a Zoom about this project, which is going to be called unMade painting. And I'm going to get to that in a minute. And he talked about how when we were in art school, painters, along with other artists, our faces were pushed towards the grindstone of theory, day in, day out. We had to absorb this theory. It was everywhere. When I was in NCAD, there was institutions that were, kind of extensions of NCAD. It's places like GragCam and Art in the Contemporary World. These were separate courses to the practical MFA, but they brought a theory-led kind of focus. And we were involved in that, but we were also making. So it's always been there as an ancillary accompaniment to the making of art. So, unMade painting, I brought up in our discussion the other day, this book, it's called unMade Film. I can't see my face in the GoPro, so I'm just showing you this. And this is a book by Oriel Orlo, whom I met at EVA. And it's about Palestine and Israel, but this is from 2014. And it's a book that kind of works alongside that crisis, ongoing crisis in the Middle East. And it's a very interesting book in that it has drawings in it. It has it's very awkward in a sense that it kind of opens up into another book which fits into it. The cover comes off it. You'll see the binding in the back. And I met Oriel in Limerick because I was selected for EVA, I think it was 2014, as a kind of fugitive art critic, where I was placing myself into the EVA events, and I used to interview other artists and write texts which kind of created a kind of critical intervention. And it was a brilliant time, actually. But I met all these artists. I was invited to the dinner. I met all these artists who were very established. They were flying around the world. They spoke about how they spent most of their time in hotels and on flights thinking up new works. And it was just a whole new world for me. I was a local artist, a local critic, and this other art world I didn't know much about. But I got to have conversations, so I was really curious about these artists. I also interviewed, during that project, Mark Kelly and other artists in the Irish art scene at the time, who were also in EVA that year. Anyway, this book, unMade Film, I'd written a review of this as well. I became really interested in this exhibition by Oriel. And it's called unMade Film because you can obviously understand why this ongoing crisis in the Palestine and Israeli conflict has been something that's been going on for 70 years or more, 80 years, whatever. So it's unMade, and the exhibition itself was bits and pieces of kind of articulations, expressions that tried to, but could never come to a kind of finish or conclusion in terms of the thing, the event, the history that Oriel was trying to express through film, through documentation, through archival material, through language. And when I mentioned it to Damien, he said, well, why not unMade painting? And then we flipped it over and we said painting unMade. And that sounded to like a statement, something that was conclusive, whereas unMade painting feels like a becoming, but never coming to a conclusion. So we're going with unMade painting. And in this project, I hope to bring small night projects and my facility here to screen print publications and other printable objects to this project, and to also bring discourse to it and bring other artists, especially painters, into the fold of the project. Substack has been a way for me to leave Instagram most of all, but also find a new space to create discourse. Now, I set up a Substack chat. I think it's titled Painting in Theory. And that was in January. And I've been putting things into it every now and then when I have time, but it hasn't generated any kind of momentum. And so I'm trying to reignite that space, but I want people to feel comfortable to start to comment, insert images, comment, um, in not just a theoretical way, but in a discursive way. And using Substack and using that chat space, I want to generate material and possibilities that are unknown now. So during Christmas, or during the Christmas break, I was playing around with screen printing. So I come from a painting background, and especially oil paint. And I was painting for 15 years before I gave it up. And it was all I wanted to do. And I'm bringing that back into the screen printing because I find screen printing quite detached, especially in relation to painting. And I'm starting to look at layering rather than kind of dot coloring, optical dot coloring. And I'm looking at layering to create these screen prints that approximate painting but can never be painting. And this is just a tester for that. So this is just this is layering of color, which approximates painting, especially oil painting. So you start with a yellow and you layer with blue and you end up with a green or something like that, okay? So, and this is the starting point, painting in theory. The tennis court is something myself and Damien discussed only on Zoom this week. And it's something that I want to hold on to as a framework. There's a book, and I forget, the book itself, the title, is from a lyric from the Spice Girls. And it's a book of collected writings by Jean Vauvert. I forget how you pronounce his name, but he wrote that very famous essay, Why Are Conceptual Artists Painting Now? Or something like that, because they think it's a good idea. And I think that phrase really encapsulates this, that there's always been a separation between ideas and painting, politics and painting. And like Liam Gillick says something really interesting as an artist of a different generation. And he talks about artists now are being co-opted by, he doesn't use the word co-opted, but this is my word, co-opted by the current politicization of art, and how artists are making work now that confront social issues. And he speaks about how the Dadaists, following World War I, began to make work that really reflected how art can't confront the socio-political, that it fails to over and over again. That is why the absurdity of the Dadaists, the irony, the playfulness, and just the abject failure of trying to do that. So he talks about this and he uses the Dadaists as an example. And I think that's where I am in relation to, as a critic, as someone interested in theory, but also interested in the materiality of painting. And this phrase, painting in theory, is really a riff on what painting is today as a digital image. Painting in theory suggests that things we're looking at or experiencing today that are art are not the thing itself. And I'm interested in that relationship between painting as a digital image and painting as the real thing. And then being seduced by the digital image as well. And then how does theory come into that relationship? So at the moment, this project starts with the title, unMade Painting. There's also one other thing I didn't mention, and that is the film myself and Damien were involved in back in 2016 to 2018, I think. And myself, Damien, Saskia Vermeulen, and Garth Nolan, who were recent graduates, filmmakers, came together and we interviewed 10, 12 or more artists in these really intense interviews in different locations. And that material now lies on a hard disk behind me. Hours and hours of footage that like the main motivation for it was in the beginning to kind of talk to painters and to figure out the motivations to be painters today in the digital age. Now that's 2016, 2018. So there was already an anxiety about, or existential anxiety around painting's objecthood at that point. But it became a film about why I became a lapsed painter, and me trying to find out why painters continue on using this kind of dumb material to represent either the world, feelings, subjectivities, whatever they are, and how they can sustain that. So I'm going to finish up there, but we're going to use that archival material to supplement in some way this project at Green and Red Gallery. And we're going to use it in a way, it probably will not be filmic. It'll probably be screen printed screenshots and different moments in the filmmaking that become objectified in some way. There'll also be the zine, which I'm starting to think through now and what that could become, but I'll need everyone involved in the chat to contribute to that and what it could become. I don't want it to be a one-off thing, so I'm hoping it becomes a serial thing. And this is the first iteration of that. But I'm going to leave it there. And I'll try and do one of these small night broadcasts again, intermittently. I did propose some things on Substack on the chat. I'd love you to visit those. I'd also love you to share this and share. You don't have to share this video, but just even share the Substack chat, Painting in Theory, which I'll attach to the link when I post this out. Thanks for listening. I hope I've recorded now because I don't know what's on the screen. But yeah, thank you.